Welcome to Professional Development on Trauma-Informed Practices. My name is Jessica Horton, and I've been in education for 10 years, and my husband and I have served in different capacities to help youth and young adults. Currently, I live in Anacoco, Louisiana, and serve as an academic advisor and oversee our newly developed emotional health program at Leesville High School. I recently completed my master's degree in educational leadership, where my research and action plan targeted trauma-informed practices in public schools to improve the social-emotional learning climate. I am truly honored to have the opportunity to partner with your school district, and I am excited to take this journey with you as you learn more about trauma and how you can work to help students overcome the barriers they face because of the adverse childhood experiences that they have encountered. My brightness is way too bright. It's killing me. Objectives that we are targeting during this professional development are considering various scenarios using current classroom practices versus trauma-informed practices. We will discuss common terms used when talking about trauma-informed practices, consider how trauma-informed practices can impact situations and enhance classroom community, and closely examine several trauma-informed approaches that will help build relationships, self-regulation skills, self-worth, stabilize emotions, and increase executive functioning skills. Now we are going to prepare to go over a few scenarios. So what I would like you to do is have something out where you can either write or take notes or jot it in a tablet or something, because as we explore these scenarios, I want you to be able to record your answers, and that way you're able to revisit these scenarios at the end of the professional development. Scenario 1. During class one morning, Michael screamed at a classmate and threw his books at the wall. What is your initial response? Based on your current classroom management plan or rules, how would you handle this situation? I would like for you just to take a moment in order to respond to this scenario. Scenario 2. Elaine, who is usually an outgoing student, comes to class but refuses to participate. What is your initial response? And based on your current classroom management plan or rules, how would you handle this situation? Take a moment to record your responses. Scenario 3. Hugo regularly states that he is stupid. What is your initial response? And based on your current classroom management plan or rules, how would you handle this situation? There is no right or wrong answer up to this point. We're just doing some self-reflection and evaluation to determine how we would respond to these diverse situations. Now, before we get started, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a video called Toxic Stress and the Brain. This video is going to help us to determine the impact that toxic stress has on academic and cognitive development.
As we develop, our brain produces 250,000 neurons every minute. By birth, we'll have 100 billion of these miraculous building blocks. But in order for our brains to fully function, we'll need synaptic connections to organize and build networks. Who we become and how we function depends entirely on how these networks develop, and our interactions with others and how we've been treated determines everything. From functions like heart rate, breathing, and basic emotions, to personality, decision-making, language, social behavior, and voluntary movement. We know that severe or prolonged abuse or neglect derails that building process, even in the womb. Distress and high anxiety in the mother allows cortisol, the stress hormone, to cross the placenta and disrupt development. When the toxic stress response is activated repeatedly, brain development and even immune systems are disrupted. Research has shown that high doses of stress hormones inhibit brain function and impulse control, overbuilding the fear center and the part of the brain that's critical to emotional regulation. TBRI uses 3 sets of principles to begin the healing caused by toxic stress. By recreating the developmental process, TBRI strives to introduce the nurturing that was absent in those toxic situations. And for the child who has endured toxic stress, healing must begin with a sense of both physical and emotional safety, something this child may have never known. Connecting principles are designed to create and nurture healthy relationships through sensitivity, consistency, and availability to disarm fear and gain trust. Giving full attention, using a gentle voice and kind facial expressions and body language are just a few of the ways to help build trust. Punitive and controlling responses only feed a child's mistrust and fear. Empowering principles are designed to meet physical needs, including sensory regulation, nutrition, and hydration, and strive to be aware of environmental issues, such as overstimulation by light, noise, or smells that can trigger behaviors that often leave caretakers baffled. The goal of the correcting principles is to help guide a child through day-to-day strategies by correcting fear-based behaviors and establishing felt safety, helping a child regulate their emotions, tell their stories, and learn through playful engagement. The Adverse Childhood Experiences study examined the effects of multiple types of abuse in childhood, and the staggering results showed that high doses of childhood adversity affect brain development drastically, leading to addictions, attempts at self-medication, impacted immune systems, chronic inflammation, and autoimmune diseases. The greater the number of traumatic events, the greater the damage. TBRI can help stop this ugly cycle. There is hope for the damaging effects of toxic stress, but it will take dedication, education, and most of all, understanding.
So this video gave a quick overview of the impact of adverse childhood experiences on the brain and the development of a child. It also gave several different strategies that could be used in helping to form relationships with students, which is really the foundational thing that needs to take place in order to begin impacting the student in a positive manner. So whenever we look at trauma, we're going to look at what's called the 3 E's of trauma to help us to get a better understanding of what this is. So first we have the event, then the experience, and ultimately the effect. So the event is simply what you would think. It's a single or repeated occurrence. Here's some events that could result in trauma. See, that word could has a little attention drawn to it because it does not necessarily result in trauma, but it's something that may. School violence, bullying, acts of terrorism, community violence, serious injury, violence in the home, discrimination, divorce, a move, homelessness, abuse, crime, death, accident. Usually we would look at all of these different events and we would automatically identify and say, oh, this is traumatic for a child. But it's not the event that is traumatic, but the experience that comes with the event. So the experience is the perception of the event by the child, which determines whether the event is truly traumatic. We cannot assume that a specific event is traumatic because it may actually bring relief, or there could be another underlying situation that we are unaware of. Some things that would help this be relief rather than traumatic. Relief would be that this experience reduces worry or fear, that it increases safety, that it provides healthier relationships, or that even more needs are met. To identify this as trauma, it would have to increase fear or worry, reduce safety, create more harm in relationships, and decrease the amount of needs that are met. So let's just say a scenario based, if a parent is arrested and the child sees that and they see that their parent is arrested, that very well could be considered as a traumatic event because it increases fear, it could increase worry, students worried about where's my dad going, how are we going to have food on the table, who's going to protect me, who's going to keep me safe. But if we were to dig a little bit deeper, and maybe the father is arrested because he has been severely abusing the student. Now we look at this experience and the event combined together, And we could see that it might be a relief because it could reduce stress or worry. The student is relieved that they are no longer going to be abused. The student is relieved that they're able to have a healthy relationship in the family that does not physically harm them. So once again, the event does not determine whether or not the student is truly experiencing trauma. It is the experience and the way that they respond to that. And those things ultimately end with the effect. It is the experience that determines the effect. The effect could be short or long term, and the effect could even vary in the degree. Usually the effect is going to depend upon multiple factors and the balancing act of trauma, relief. Is it more traumatic? Is it providing more relief for the family? But we should never make a decision about a situation based upon minimal types of information. So, how can we help our students? First, by taking time to understand the impact of trauma, which is what you guys are doing today. Also, by learning trauma-informed approaches to support students, again, which is something that we're going to focus on today. So the first thing is just understanding and identifying trauma. So it is important for us to be able to identify and understand even just the foundational level of trauma. There's over 35 million students enrolled in the public school system who have experienced at least one type of childhood trauma, whether that's emotional, physical, or sexual. Statistically speaking, 68% of schools are students who have been victims of trauma. The Child Treatment Data Bank says 51% of those students have been physically assaulted, 25% of them have been maltreated, and 8% of them have been sexually abused. The CDC also says that 2/3 of the U.S. children have been exposed to at least one type of adverse childhood experience. So one experience is definitely traumatic, but the more exposure that a child has, whether that's the same exposure, the same types of trauma, or whether it's a combination of emotional, physical, and or sexual, the more reoccurring events and experiences that lead to that true traumatic effect, that is going to create more harm within the student. So there's internal and external symptoms of trauma. First thing is that, the social and the emotional learning needs often suffer as a result of this trauma. Negative behaviors are also something that you will see often because they are truly external displays of internal pain and hurt. Another thing that we may notice would be behavior within the classroom. It does impact the classroom, and it also impacts the entire school culture. Exposure to trauma is also related to negative school outcomes. So the students tend to maybe have poor attendance, poor relationship building with their peers or with their teachers. They do not perform as well academically. And a lot of times whenever teachers even see these combination of things, many times students are actually referred to special education to be evaluated, when truly it's not a true disability. It's just the barriers that have been created by the student due to the trauma that has been impacting their life, whether it be one time or multiple times. And whenever we're able to identify some of just the basic signs of trauma, it can help lead these students to positive school outcomes and reduce the trauma-related symptoms that they've experienced. So now we're going to just take a look at some quick common external signs of trauma. This could be any age group. So a loss of appetite, they're easily startled, difficulty concentrating or remembering, frequent headaches or stomach aches, constant state of alert, it's that hypervigilance that we're going to talk about a little bit later, diminished interest in school and activities, the inability to experience joy or pleasure, self-blame or shame, feeling of detachment from others, recurrent conflicts with peers, irritability, outbursts of anger, trouble focusing on classwork, and acting as if the traumatic event were occurring. So like I said, these are just a few things that you might see as an external sign of trauma. Just because a student is showcasing one of these does not necessarily mean that they've been impacted by trauma, but the trauma-informed approaches could still benefit them. It's again just a quick look at statistics. 61% of people have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience. 1 in 6 experience 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. So, there's been a lot of things that have been taking place this year. We're all very aware of them, from the pandemics to hurricanes and different things that we've all been experiencing. But even without those things, statistically speaking, 61% of your class have experienced some type of adverse childhood experience. Well, with all of these extra things that we have faced this year, those numbers have definitely increased. There's not a current updated number that I've found, to rate specifically here to our region, but those numbers definitely have skyrocketed. Been impacted by, deaths because of the COVID illnesses, hospitalization, long-term effects because of the COVID-19, job shutdowns, lower income, homes being destroyed because of the hurricane. So at this time, we're seeing that students, not even looking at a statistic, but looking at the reality of what we have all been facing in this region, all of our students have been experiencing trauma. So it's going to be our job to help them overcome the disconnect that they're feeling and bring them back to a place where they feel like they are loved, they are connected, that they can trust adults, and that they can have true safety. So here we're going to just take a quick look at this graphic. It's called Trauma-Informed Approaches. On the bottom left, what you can see in that square says family history, homelessness, rape, abuse, discrimination, racism, disaster, poverty, loss, terrorism, violence, war, serious accidents, illnesses, fleeing from country, home, neglect. And look, if you see that, those roots, right, those are the roots to the problem. And then you see up as it grows up to the left side of the tree at the top, we see the outcome. So think of this as like a cause and effect. So the bottom is the cause. On the left side, we see a dead, broken tree. So we see, once again, homelessness, rape, abuse, poverty, those types of things. And then we move up to the top, and what we see is things like pain, fear, sadness, nightmares, poor sleep, anxiety, racing heart, depression, flashbacks, chest pain, substance use, and the list could go on and on. Not only do these things have a negative connotation, but also negative denotation. So we see that whole left side of the tree, if we allow the root to stay in things like the loss, the war, the terrorism, the poverty, and all of those things, then we see the top left side of the tree is actually going to be the result of those things. But now if we look at the right side of this tree, let's look at the roots on the right side. That part of the tree is alive and flourishing. And we see here that those students are able to have social connections, primary care, good support groups. They're learning, they're gaining knowledge. And all of those things can help the healing process. And in that, what we see at the top right part of the tree is there's an increase in self-esteem, an increase in their compassion, an increase in their hope, their peace. They feel like fulfillment. They can accomplish things finally. So it's important for us to realize that whatever the cause is at the bottom truly does impact the ladder, right? So we have this cause and effect type situation, and it's our jobs as educators to make sure that we are helping to bring healing for these students so that they can break through these barriers and become who they were created to be. So let's talk about this real quick. So why trauma-informed practices? Why is it such a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because students who have been through trauma have missed the foundation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to build upon. So we know the first thing right there at the bottom we see is physiological needs: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. Okay, so those types of things. And right above that, what we see is the safety needs: personal security, employment, resources, health, property. And then it continues to build love and sense of belonging, family, friends, connection, esteem, self-esteem, respect, status, recognition, strength, freedom. Okay, all the way up to them believing, and not only believing, but actually being able to become the most that they can ever possibly be. But whenever students have experienced trauma, what has happened is they don't have that foundation. And if you don't have the foundation, you cannot build upon it. Okay, you can't learn to run before you walk. And just like this, you can't have safety needs until you first have your basic physiological needs that are met. We have to start at the bottom of this pyramid to build our way up to helping our students become the best that they can be. And students cannot learn if they do not feel safe. Students cannot learn if they do not feel like they're known. And students cannot learn if they do not feel that they are cared for and cared about within our school settings. So today we're going to focus on these 5 different areas with trauma-informed approaches. So here we're looking at relationships. We're going to talk about relationships, how you can better connect with your students, self-regulation, so how you can help your students self-regulate a little bit more and how you can support that, how you can help impact their self-worth where they feel like they're more valued and loved and they think better of themselves, how you can also help them with the struggle of hypervigilance where they're overstimulated and always on edge and on the defense, along with executive functionings to help them use those critical thinking skills in order to perform better within the academic setting. So the first thing we're going to look at is relationships. Here we have this quote, and it says, "The relationships we forge and maintain with others are essential to our collective and individual success." Relationships in our lives foster all types of things. But as we look at this in terms of Maslow's hierarchy, we can see that relationships can help meet the physiological needs. It also helps provide safety. It helps provide the love and the sense of belonging, and it even builds esteem, which all lay the foundation for students to reach their full potential. Without healthy relationships, a lot of the things that our students are facing cannot be overcome. So it's extremely important that we focus on healthy relationships above all else. So one thing that you can do is welcome your students. If you're face-to-face right now, you can make sure you're at your door. You're speaking to every single student that comes in your door. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be like those YouTube videos where you see teachers with these really fun, fancy handshakes. It just has to be true and authentic from you because your students are going to be able to recognize and see that authenticity. So you want to make sure that you welcome your students, connect with them. Whatever your response is, however you communicate with them, it needs to be loving. It needs to be inviting. It needs to be welcoming. Do not let a student walk into your classroom without speaking to him or her. Make them feel like they matter, make them feel like they connected, and make them feel like they are truly a part of your class. Now, if you are doing virtual teaching, the same thing, except you're not necessarily standing at your door, but you're already logged into your Google Meet, you're ready and you're set up. As each of those kids are logging in, you can speak their name, say, "Hi, I'm so glad that you're here." Know that your acknowledgement of them matters. It matters. And next thing you know, one day they'll be saying, "Hey, Miss Brown, I'm so glad to see you today." And that connection is going to become very strong, and that is going to be able to allow you to have even a greater impact within their life. So another thing that you can do aside from welcoming those students is to make sure that you're building intentional relationships. Get to know your students. This is key. It's amazing to me every year how we get to the end of the school year and there's teachers who know very little about their students. Get to know your students. Sometimes it may take a minute, but it's worth it. It's worth it to slow down in the beginning, to build those strong relationships, to have a greater impact and a greater outcome in the end. So get to know your students. First, what's your student's name? Elementary teachers, that might be easy for you. High school teachers, sometimes that's a challenge because you might be teaching 150 different kids, and the new kid may come in 2 weeks before school is over, and you feel like, oh, well, they're not here for long, but that connection matters. Know your student's name. Know what your students are interested in. Learn how your students learn best. What are their goals? When has the student been successful? And when did they tend to thrive? So make sure you're acknowledging them. Who in the building has the student connected with most? So who is that safe person for that student? How often do you interact with students? And what about even beyond the academic interaction? What do you say to them as they walk into your classroom? Once again, take those quick moments in order to really connect and make a difference. Ask them about their clubs, ask them about athletics that they're involved in, ask them about community service opportunities. Just make sure that you're really investing in that student beyond the academics. Okay, it's about the whole child, not just cognitive. We can't forget about their social and emotional needs. So what has been the most helpful intervention for the student so far? Think about the times that they have struggled. What have you done to intervene? Was it helpful? Was it not? Did it help them thrive? And these are all things that we need to make sure that we're focusing on. You know, whenever we're in the school, these things might be fairly easy for us to do and navigate through. And, you know, we actually oftentimes think with the virtual learning that has kind of watered down maybe that interaction with the student. And for us as adults, it may be true depending on where you are in your teaching career and your comfortability with technology and with communicating virtually. But we're teaching a generation who was born into technology. And, you know, we have students in our class who will speak out verbally, but then we have some who will not. And as you're interacting virtually with your students, you're going to have students who respond, who are willing to type a private comment on an assignment, maybe in Google Classroom, or who are more willing to send you a quick email or something of that nature, where it's not going to be publicized and broadcast in front of the whole class. So I really believe that through building these relationships, even virtually, that you're going to be able to reach students that you wouldn't have been able to reach before because they were too shy or they were too timid and they just didn't want that type of public attention. You know, some ways that you can do this virtually as well would be to do some student inventories. Take a time to create a Google form. Ask students, just like on this list here, hey, what are some of your interests? What's a goal? What is your learning style? Do you know what your learning style is? What are some things that you like to be involved in? Share stories. You can do read alouds. There's tons of opportunities for virtual and face-to-face. You could even have students help you create like a class playlist so that while they're working, they could be listening to some class-appropriate music. So relationships is all about going beyond the classroom. Going beyond the classroom. So even though connecting with your students is important, connecting with their caregivers is something that is also extremely vital. It's very time consuming, but it can make a huge difference. And then that way as well, if there's a conference that's ever needed, the ice is already broken because there's a connection with the student and with the family. And families also want to know that you care about that student, you care about their well-being, you care about their education. And together, whenever you can unite with that family, you're going to see a greater impact with that student, especially academically and sometimes even socially and emotionally. So now let's talk about influence. And I want you guys to remember that you have the ability to influence the lives of students regardless of their label. You do not have to label them as a student who has experienced trauma, or as a student who is regularly tardy for class, or a student who never comes to school. You know, and often in education, we try to attach a label to a student to identify behavior instead of finding out the reason for their behavior. And we must remember that we may not be able to completely fix a problem, but we can influence that student's life and help make it better. So here's some things on the left-hand column that you see in this chart that you cannot control. You cannot control whether Camellia comes to school today, but you can influence the way that you welcome her when she arrives. You cannot control the way that the services that Daryl is eligible for, but you can control or you can influence the attention that you give Daryl before he struggles. So see, as you go through this, you cannot control if a colleague sees you as capable, but you can influence your attitude and your communication with your colleagues so that they can see your abilities and your strengths. You cannot control if a parent gets upset with you, but you can influence how you listen to that parent and how you hear their needs and concerns. You cannot control how a student chooses to behave under stress, but you can influence the environment you provide for the student and your willingness to look at the need versus the behavior. You know, we often think that we can't control others. That isn't fully true. We may not be able to control other people, but we can influence others. And we can control ourselves in order to help us to have a better response and a better influence into the lives of others. You know, influence is impacted by the environment that we create, by the relationships that we build, by the encouragement that we provide, and the kindness that we give. And whenever we create the proper environment and relationships, then we have the ability to influence students, to influence their beliefs within themselves, to influence their attitude about education, their attitude about learning or what they think they're capable of. We have the ability to influence how they behave and how they respond, and even the academic outcomes within our own classes. So another topic that we're going to briefly look at is self-regulation. So self-regulation is vital to a student's success. So some things that we need to make sure that we do is that we want to make sure that we help them calm down. We don't want to escalate. We want to make sure that we are avoiding power struggles, that we're giving them a little bit of space. Let them calm down in a healthy manner. We also want to make sure that we're asking them open-ended questions to help them work through a process to effectively calm down. In order to help them self-regulate, we have to help them. We cannot escalate the situation. We cannot raise our voice. We cannot respond in a manner that's just off the cuff. We have to really process what's happening, and then we have to be able to show some grace. So by showing grace, what happens is that we have long-term benefits. There's long-term benefits for showing grace, okay? It helps to give the students a different way of seeing you as the teacher. It helps to foster connections and safety for others. And it also helps to receive gratitude that even though a situation deserved accountability, knowing that we are all human and we make mistakes, that prevailed over the need to prove that a wrong occurred. That student's going to know that they did wrong, but your extension of grace and loving them in a very guiding and in a direct way is going to be more impactful than just immediately sending them to the office. Here's a couple scenarios. Okay, grace. It can be so frustrating when every time we see a word and it feels like it's the first time. Blame. You just read that word 5 minutes ago. Grace. I am working really hard and doing my best to help the student. I am in need of some support to help brainstorm some other options. Blame. Nothing I ever do seems to work. This kid just doesn't want to learn. So take a second and look at these. Feel free to pause the screen if you need to as you go back and forth to see the difference between the grace and the blame. Next thing that we want to look at here is self-worth. Mark Twain said that a man cannot be comfortable without his own approval. We first have to be able to approve of ourselves, to see the value and the purpose within ourselves before we can be comfortable in our performance in front of others. So think of that as far as the classroom. You know, we all experience moments of self-doubt and uncertainty, and sometimes we even think, oh, I'm such a failure. Oh, I can't believe I did that. And you know, even the most happy and healthy people have those moments, but it's how we walk and process through that that's really going to make a difference. So here we have 5 strategies to help build self-worth. 1, make sure that you give specific and genuine feedback on efforts when appropriate. 2, point out concrete signs of progress. 3, showcase accomplishments and brag on the students. 4, engage students in conversations and point out their strengths and skills privately. 5, engage students in tasks where they can excel. Another way to help build self-worth is through healthy communication and by praising your students. Never be afraid to brag on your students. Brag on your students. I cannot say it enough. Let them know how much you appreciate their contribution to the class. Let them know how much them just being in your class matters and brings such a fun classroom community. And you know, there's 7 simple words that can change a student's life forever. And all it is I love having you in my class. Your student needs to know that you love having them in your class. Another area that we're going to glance over is going to be hypervigilance. So hypervigilance is a heightened state of awareness and sensitivity to certain sensory stimuli. Okay. So one way to kind of help break through this, okay, is to be consistent. That student is always going to be on the defense. There's going to be certain types of stimuli that's going to trigger them. But one way that you can help to stabilize that is to be consistent. So have routines within the class to support student regulation. Try to be consistent in your responses and your emotions. It's extremely important, not just for you to have good routines, but it's also extremely important for you to be consistent with your responses and your emotions. So you can't get mad at one thing one day and then be okay with it the next and then fly off the cuff the next day. And we all have bad days. We all have difficult days, days where we have a lot on our mind, especially this year with all the challenges that we're facing, but so are your students. So it's more important than ever for you to do your best to be consistent in your responses and in your emotions, regardless of what is happening around you. Another thing for you to remember is that you might be the only stability that your students have. Your students are going home to uncertainty. They're going home to difficult situations in their family. And you know, in a time of uncertainty, routine brings familiarity. And sometimes less is more. Get rid of all the clutter in your classroom, clean it out. Let's have great labeled areas so your student always know where they can go. Hey, if they need a pencil, they know I go to this station. If they need a sticky note, they go here. If they need Kleenex, they go. There's never a question about where they can find supplies in your room. There's never a question about how you're going to be as far as your response. Maybe if a kid drops something on the floor, they're never worried about, oh, is Miss Tyler going to be angry today, or, you know, that they feel consistent within your classroom. The one thing we want to make sure that we're doing is reducing the amount of stress in that child's life, and we can reduce a lot of that stress through our consistency in our classroom. So this is something I found through my research, and first let me just preface this by saying that we are not qualified to give therapy, okay? We are not therapists, we are educators, but part of being an educator is supporting our students in their social, emotional well-being, as well as their cognitive. But this is something that I came across. It's called the 3 C's of cognitive therapy. And basically what it is you're helping to teach your students to begin to regulate their own thoughts. This is all about their thoughts, what they're thinking. The first step involves teaching them to catch the thoughts that are associated with a specific experience that has a negative emotion. So think of a situation, maybe that could be brought into the classroom. Something happens, that student automatically has a negative thought. You're able to help them recognize it and catch it. So you're catching it so it doesn't continue to grow and just kind of go all over the place. The next thing that they need to do is they need to check it. So this is a time where a student can kind of go through a little detective work, if you want to think of it like that. They're learning to gather some ideas about, hey, how accurate is this thought? How accurate is this emotion? How useful is it? Is it helping me? Is it hurting me? Is it real? Is this something that's going to impact me long term? Is this the worst case scenario thought? If it is it true? Does it need to be brought back in? And then ultimately helping them to change their thought, help it to be more realist, more in the moment, not worrying about next week, not worrying about next year, but let's take care of the moment that we have at hand. So we want to catch that thought or that emotion. We want to check it and see how accurate and useful it is. And then we want to help them change it to something that's more accurate and helpful. Last thing we're going to talk about is executive functioning. So executive function strategies help students to go beyond the content that is being taught so that learning the process based rather than only outcome based. So it's really about critical thinking skills, some great critical thinking skills. So here we are. We're going to look at teaching support and environmental support just briefly. So our teaching support, what it is one thing we can look at metacognitive language. So we want to make sure that we're using some of these language skills within our classroom in order to help students promote some independence with maybe a specific skill. Can help them to repeat directions to a partner, even have them volunteer to repeat directions as a whole class. So let me show you an example. So with a younger student, articulating the challenge could be useful. I see that you are missing a pencil. Could you, or will you need a pencil to complete the assignment? Where could you find one in the classroom? So really bringing that awareness to them. Maybe then you can display the steps or the questions that the students could ask themselves. So really it's about external thinking, helping that student walk through those questions of self-discovery to help them see the process, to help them solidify the steps that are needed in order to come across or to beat a certain challenge that they may face. Next thing is time management. You could help them with some time management skills by posting maybe a classroom schedule, activity schedule. You could even take large assignments or long-term assignments if it's a project perhaps, and you could break it down, or what we call here is chunking. You could chunk it into smaller sections in order for that student to see some more short-term goals that are just going to continue to build upon a long-term goal. But what that's really going to do is help that student with some time management. Another thing that could be very helpful in this critical thinking, development would be just to review the lessons. So this is an opportunity for students to just kind of review those previous learnings, things that you have already provided, whether it's a lesson or maybe it's a skill. Could be through oral presentation, quick Q&A, graphic organizers, which are really helpful for students who have the executive functioning deficits, because those organizers help to bring those thoughts into a way where they're organized. Maybe by the time the material, it's very structural, and it's just very helpful for them to be able to see that. The last one on this side is going to be the teacher interaction. So you're constantly checking in with that student, making sure that that student's doing well. You're having a great, caring, loving demeanor, giving lots of positive reinforcement with that student. Now, if we look at this environmental support, what we see here is you could post a daily schedule, clear and consistent routines. We keep seeing this over and over, okay? Clear and consistent. Clear visual supports, maybe posters, problem-solving skills, routines, could be rules and regulations or classroom standards and expectations that you have. Clear out, minimize clutter, just let it be a very soft-spoken and clean environment. Next thing that you would want to do here would be to make sure that you are making a decision based on goals. So if you see students are behaving in a particular way, like you see on this left-hand column, then you want to look at, wait, are they maybe being bossy because they have an emotional need, a relational need, a control need, or physical need? And if so, then how do I want to respond to that? So really it's all about taking care of the student's needs and not the behavior. The student's distracted. What is it that's going on there again? And then let's say if they're distracted because they have a physical need, maybe they're really hungry or they need to use the restroom. Oh, well, let's take care of that. So we want to look at the goal that we want to come to be, rather than the behavior in the moment. So why are they doing what they're doing? And then what do we do to help bring about correction to that? So we're going to take just a couple of quick minutes to review these scenarios based upon the things that we've met. First one, we're going to go a little further in each of these because now we're focused on the communication and we're learning more. So during class one morning, Michael screamed at a classmate and threw his books at the wall. Usually that's where we stop, we immediately respond. But whenever Michael calmed down, you took the time to have a conversation with him. And he revealed that his mother and father had a fight the night before, and his mom left to cool off. And that morning, Michael noticed that his mom had not returned, and he was concerned. Michael's mom has left before, but was always back before the morning. So there's a couple of things that we can look at here. We can look at self-regulation because of his outburst, and even hypervigilance, depending on what the factor was that really triggered him. So here are our questions. Consider the trauma-informed practices. So now what's your new response? How did understanding the root of his action change from your initial response? And how can you connect with Michael? Okay, and here we are with scenario 2. Feel free to pause the video and respond to this one as well. Here, Elaine, who is usually an outgoing student, comes to class but refuses to participate. When you take the time to talk to her, she refuses to share any information about what has caused this behavior. Feel free once again to pause the video to respond. Okay, and here we are with scenario 3 with Hugo. You took a little more time Feel free to pause the video. Again, I'm going to let you respond to this one on your own as well. Okay, and just a reminder that you don't have to necessarily identify the trauma. Just know that you're supporting all of your students. And 9 times out of 10, the story behind the misbehavior won't make you angry. It will break your heart. Choose to make a difference. Choose to be a champion.
Spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good. Some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. They said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class. Because I am the best teacher and you are the best students, they put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise, you just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so I gave a quiz, 20 questions, Student missed 18. I put a +2 on this paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection. It's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Just want to encourage all of you guys. I love that video so much. I watch it usually a couple of times a year. But I just want to encourage all of you guys, above all of the strategies and all of the practices that we could ever look at for regulating emotions, providing self-worth to students, dealing with that hypervigilance and, you know, that always on the defense type attitude, and even looking at their critical thinking skills. If your students do not know that you care about them, if your students do not know that they matter to you, that they matter in that class, it's going to be extremely difficult to get them, one, to learn, but two, for them to feel safe, connected, cared about. Once again, we have to be able to go back and look at that Maslow's hierarchy of needs and realize, wait, first of all, I have to make sure my students' basic needs are met. You're not their parents, but you are there to offer support. But you are also there to help them feel safe. Because as an educator, it's not just about their cognitive growth and development, but also their social and their emotional skills. So let me encourage you with this last thing and just remind you that there are just a few words that can change a student's life. That can change a student's life. And those simple words are, I love having you in my class.